What's the difference between a brand new SM8 Vokey wedge and a relatively old burnt out one? Probably about £90, I'd say. With a rusted up, broken, destroyed wedge, it's going to raise your confidence more than spending £150. Guys, how you doing? Welcome back to a brand new video. Simon down here at Sanford Springs Golf Club. SM8 wedge. I think this is the first SM8 wedge that I've actually come across, mainly because obviously they're just so expensive, or have been, especially over the last year. Still £100 second hand, £110. I'll show you some of the sold listings for what these do roughly go for. And this isn't like brand new, but I mean it's pretty, hit less than 40-50 times. I'll show you the listing that I actually got these. Got a full set of Rogue Pros, M2 2016 driver, Callaway cart bag, and 3 SM8 wedges for £450. They were originally listed for 500, but I said, would he do 450? And he said yes. So that is exactly how I became the sole owner of this wedge. I want to test something a bit different. I want to work out the pros and cons of a burnt out. And when I say burnt, well, let me just show you the face. And as you can see, the test subject we're going to be using today is probably one of the most worn wedges I've ever come across. Like, this thing hasn't got any grooves. The grooves are basically just been blended into one flat piece of metal. So it's going to be a very interesting test. However, there's going to be pros from both of these clubs, and I think I should make this point quite early on in the next clip. And so that's why we go into test number 1 to prove my point. Left-handed chipping versus right-handed chipping. I'm going to be using a 54 degree, so it's not the same loft, but you'll get the point in this video here. I'm using a 54 degree Titleist wedge, red saw, on my left hand side to represent you guys that have just started the game in the last year. You probably spent the last 8 months, 9 months just practicing your driving, and now you're kind of concentrating on the wedge play because you realise actually it's quite important. And it doesn't matter what wedge I have in my left hand game at the moment, the result will be the same. I'll have a few thins out the back, I'll have a couple of good ones, some dunches, and then everything else in between. On my right hand game, I'm using the burnt out wedge. If I put myself on the GC quad and we looked at numbers, I could generate more spin with the burnt out wedge off a mat than I can with a brand new SM8. Why? Because I have the technique, I've put the hours in, the practice. My left hand game couldn't care less what I've got in my hand. I could have a 300-pound wedge in it and the same outcome is still going to happen. And that is why this is the first bonus of this. You guys that have just started need to find a burnt out wedge. You might have a nice new one, but I need you to start practicing off grass, in the mud, because that is when you're going to learn a decent sound technique. And if you have a wedge in the bag that you can practice with that you really couldn't care less about, just like this one, you can put the hours in and not worry that your £150 wedge is getting ruined. Technique is king when it comes to wedge play, and when you've done 100, 200, 300 hours of decent wedge game practice off the grass, in the dirt, uphill, down lie, bare lie, then maybe you should upgrade to the SM8. Now, before we go any further in this video, I do need to stress this, that the SM8 wedge is far superior in every aspect to that burnt out one I have. But what I want you guys to know, and especially you guys that are starting the game, the difference and clarification of what that SM8 wedge is going to do for you. In terms of hitting shots around the fringe, if you struggle with those, for example, the SM8 wedge isn't going to help that. You'll see a few shots now when I'm using the burnt out one and the SM8, and it's such a finesse, small little putt or chip shot that actually the grooves don't make any bit of difference, because let's be honest, there's nothing in between the ball and the grooves. The idea of grooves is actually to filter grass and water away from the ball, away from those edges, so that you get more friction, get more control. So if you're struggling with those 20-yard chip shots around the green, spending £150 on the wedge isn't going to make the slightest bit of difference. I think there's one other thing that we need to get clear as well, and that's spin rate. Loads of people come to me and go, Simon, I'd love to hit a shot past the flag and then spin it back towards the hole. And any decent player that's been playing this game for 10, 12, 15 years, has great wedge game control, knows full well hitting a wedge hard enough and controlled enough to spin it back is actually more of a pain than use, because then we have to go up a club, take 20% off it and hit a knockdown shot rather than just hit a full wedge into the flag, especially if you live in a country like England where the greens are very soft and when they get them right, very quick. One thing that SM8 does very well, which I've just realised now, is blend itself into the more modern day clubs. If you're getting fitted for powerful, forgiving, long hitting de-lofted irons, let's say like the P790 or the Mavericks or whatever it might be, you need a wedge at the bottom with the right grinds to match that nicely. No point going from a pitching wedge that goes 130 yards to a Vokey, Callaway, whatever it might be, that's essentially just a blade and goes 80 yards. Therefore, what the modern day wedges actually do incredibly well is keep that sleek, controlled, bladed finish that can interact with the turf, just like the older ones can or could, but give you that element of forgiveness that the old ones just didn't. Hit 2 wedge shots into this green from about 100 yards just to give it a bit of on-course test. Both similar balls are both NXT's Titleist, and this closest to the flag, SM8. These weren't my first 2 tries, by the way. I wanted to hit 2 that felt like the similar strike, if that makes any sense, because you hit it slightly heavy or slightly out of the toe, that's going to affect the spin rate regardless. So I want to try and get as close without being a robot to test how good these wedges are in terms of spin from a fairway, and then we're going to do one out the rough. SM8 close to the flag, but obviously that's down to the swing and hit, and again you can see it's slightly bit more from the other wedge, but guess what, I hit it further, probably another 4 or 5 yards further, which probably suggests that I hit it even harder, which means I probably got more spin on it. I think you're starting to get the point. Now, by no means am I saying go and buy a rusted, broken, faceless wedge. I'm just trying to show you the 2 completely opposite sides of the spectrum and still how close they are in terms of performance out on the golf course. Hence why I'm not saying you need to spend £150 on a brand new wedge, but also I'm not saying you need to spend 15, but even if you spend £20 more, you know what I mean? Get an SM6, SM5, okay, it's been reused, but they just got it re-gripped, so that's an absolute bonus. You're going to be somewhat close to the new stuff that's coming out, and if you're not spending £150 on the wedge, you probably don't mind getting down and dirty with it, taking it out in the winter, hitting 500 shots, just like this gentleman did with his wedge, off a grass range, around your chipping and putting area, because realistically that's the bit that's going to help your wedge game in the long term. Hitting wedges off mats, sadly, does not improve your wedge play out on the golf course. There's just too many variables on the golf course that you need to get used to and confident with. Loads of you top tracer range probably score brilliantly off a mat, but then when you come out onto the golf course and it's November or February, all of a sudden you dunch one chip and then your confidence gets knocked. Then you thin one out the back, then you hit one right, then you hit one heavy. That's the bit that makes more of a difference when it comes to your wedge game. Confidence. And practicing 50, 60, 70 hours through this winter with a rusted up, broken, destroyed wedge is going to raise your confidence more than spending £150. Right, this is where the SM8 is supposed to outperform the old wedge, which I imagine it would. Heavy rough, 100 yards away, 58-degree wedges. Let's see how they act on the ground. It's interesting to think that any of the club face actually made direct contact with the golf ball out of those 2. So there must have been so much grass out of both of those shots. Slightly steeper with the SM8. Didn't get anywhere near the green, I think about 100 yards. But that was the heaviest rough I could find in the shortest area. And as I said, I don't think grooves played much of a part in either of those. Now, sadly, didn't hit the green with either of those shots. But again, show testament to how wet England gets in the winter. I've still made a divot past the ball and it's spun back on what is pretty much our fairway. And again, with the SM8, stopped, spun back, passed from the flag. Out of the heaviest rough into one of the slowest greens, i.e. the fringe. So here's a quick summary. The SM8 outclasses, outperforms in every element of the game versus the burnt out wedge. But put it into a hand of someone that hasn't learnt to hit a wedge properly, those differences, margins, gains, become pretty much non-existable. Therefore, to spend another £100 on a wedge that's not really going to give you much for your game in the short term really doesn't make much sense to me. Spend this winter grinding, practicing, playing, and I'm not adverse to you guys spending money on your game. I'd always start with a putter, great putter fit, then wedges. But as I say to everyone, pointless getting a putter fit if you can't hold 7 out of 10 putts from 4 foot away with anything. let alone a 350 pound putter. Put the time in this winter, grind at your craft, then come March, April, upgrade the bits of equipment that you know that you deserve to have in the bag to fully grab the potential that they will give you. Before I finish this video, I do want to share something with you. I'd rather play with the other wedge than this one if I had to have the choice. You know why? Because the grip on the end of it is a mid-size, and for the life of me, I cannot play with chunky grips. Something so simple like a 10-pound grip on the end of it that is slightly wrong makes the 150-pound head completely useless. And you know why? Because I won't be confident with it. Guys, if you like this video, leave it a like. Subscribe if you're new. Catch you guys later.
Morning Tom, hope you're doing well. Good afternoon mate, well done on the lesson. And
Evening Alan, not a problem at all. And testing the G30s and the
afternoon gents, on my way to the lockup. Go pick up the Mura iron.